Good evening, everyone. 14th of June, super excited. We're talking today about the case against sugar. So if this was a trial, I think sugar would definitely, I don't know, might be sent to jail. But it's one of those things that we really have to watch our sugar intake. If you know someone who is a sugar addict, and there are some out there, I would say I know probably a few. Tell me in the chat. If you're, oh, hello, Ann Ang. I've got some first time listeners on here. If you don't know me or you don't know anything about my usual style, we talk about a lot of different things on this call every Monday. Sometimes we talk about essential oils. Sometimes we talk about nutrition. Sometimes we talk about business, but we really have a lot of different topics going on. And I'm so excited that all of you are on. If you were on, Facebook about an hour ago, I was talking about generating leads for your business. And for those of you who are on that call and this call, congratulations. I don't know if you know, but I actually have some homework for you for that last call. So go head over to Facebook, Singapore doTERRA on Facebook, and check out the homework, because I know you will want to get your prizes. I think if you do your homework every week or so, you're going to get some prizes at the end. So that's super, super important. But today we're talking right here, we're going to be talking about the case against sugar. I think this is really important. Sugar is a toxin like many other toxins, and some of us are totally addicted. I will say when I was younger, like a kid, I didn't like sugar at all. I know that sounds crazy, but I would never willfully choose sugar. Once a week, I got a small allowance from my parents. In those days, it was less than a US dollar. I want to say maybe half a dollar. And I was allowed to go to my local candy store and get a few things. And the one thing that I would always pick was chewing gum. So I know all of my Singaporean friends will be horrified by this, but that was my favorite thing to chew. And I chewed chewing gum, full sugar, for many, many years, but eventually I gave it up. So today I'm going to be talking about the case against sugar. What's interesting is there's been a lot of news in the press talking about the effects of sugar on the body. And we're going to learn about some of that stuff today. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I have actually quite a few slides, and I think we're going to go to a new method maybe of announcing some of these calls, which I think is going to be more effective for us. So here we go. Can you see my screen? If you can, give me a thumbs up. Great. Okay, so let's get cracking and let's talk about the case against sugar. Those of you who know me know that I try to eat a fairly balanced diet, but it's actually really kind of easy to go overboard today. And we're going to talk about all the different ways that sugar shows up in our diet and the effects on our body. So sugar comes in many, many different forms beyond just the white powder that we see here on the screen. Some ways maybe are better than others and have some names maybe that you wouldn't even recognize on an ingredient list. The whole subject of sugar in the health industry can really be confusing. So some people will say it's okay in moderation. Your body doesn't really digest it. It isn't designed to digest sugars, and sugar-free products are always healthy. Other people say artificial sweeteners are worse. So we're really hearing a lot of conflicting information. Some people say you need sugar for energy. Sugar is addictive. So literally we hear everything all over the map. All of these are common and kind of oppose one another, right? We are consuming in our diets more sugar than ever before. And according to the United States Department of Agriculture, the average American, now I don't know all over the world, but I know Americans, right, consume between 150 and 170 pounds of refined sugar every year. That is just massive. That means they're consuming about 75 kilos of sugar per year, my friends. This is just massive. So compare this to the 4 to 6 pound of yearly consumption of the early 1800s, or even the high yearly amount of 19 pounds in the 1900s. So back in the 1800s, we were consuming about 2 kilos, 2 to 3 kilos. That was in the 1800s. By the 1900s, we were consuming about 50 kilos, maybe a little bit less, even 40 kilos. And now we're up to 75 kilos on average. It's horrible. So we really have to watch what we're doing, right? And that's a lot of sugar. Whoops. So let's talk about the sugar equation. So like I said to you before, 75 kilos, which is an average, which means like babies who probably aren't consuming any sugar are added into that equation, and maybe older people who aren't consuming as much are added into that equation, which means that all the rest of us are just adding tons and tons of sugar to our diet. That number translates to about half a kilo, honestly, per day, or 30 to 60 teaspoons. I'm sorry, a quarter of a kilo, not a half a kilo. It's a quarter of a kilo per day, and 30 to 60 teaspoons of sugar per day. Now that doesn't mean, and I'm drinking iced coffee here without any sugar or milk in it, because I'm drinking it black. This is a recent change for me, I admit. I haven't been drinking sugar in my coffee for years, but I have been drinking milk of different sorts, whether it's cow's milk or oat milk or soy milk, in my coffee for many, many years. That means we're putting, imagine 30 to 60 teaspoons per day. I mean, it's just really shocking, but that's not the way we're really getting all of our sugar. It's hard to believe that we'd even be capable of that, but keep in mind, you're just not consuming your sugar in your coffee or your tea or your baked goods. It's really hidden in so many foods that you probably eat regularly. So some of the places that we see a lot of hidden sugar are things like ketchup, barbecue sauce, tomato sauces, salad dressing, yogurts, breads, protein bars, soups, canned fruits, cereals, crackers, oatmeal, frozen dinners, and many, many more. This list doesn't include the obvious culprits of sugar, including soda, cakes, cookies, ice cream, but these are some of the surprising way that we get sugar in our diet. Now, let me know, did any of the things that I mentioned surprise you? I have to say, sugar and soup sounds ridiculous to me, but I guess there's some in there. I have to say, I am a big label reader whenever I go to the supermarket. And when I go, I'm sometimes shocked to find sugar in different things. And I will often put something down if there's sugar written on the label. So let me know, did any of those things shock you? I think we all knew about ketchup, right? And barbecue sauce. But what about the other one? Alexandria says sugar is really in almost everything that we eat. That's absolutely true. Any of those items surprise you, or no surprises at all? If there were no surprises to you, let me know. I want to hear in the chat also. Just want to keep in contact with you guys. I want to really hear from you today. Okay. Ivy says, no surprise. Yeah, I know. Sometimes it's shocking. So what are some of the aliases for sugar? Quinny also says, no surprise. One of the main, Calicia says, no surprise. Okay, so instead of seeing the word sugar, you may see the following names, and I'm going to just kind of read them out for you. They may seem familiar to you. Some of them may not. Things like dextrose, maltose, glucose, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, corn sweetener, sucrose, sorbitol, sorghum syrup, agave nectar, carbitol, evaporated cane juice, galactose, inversol, you haven't heard of inversol, rice malt, and nectars. All of those are different types of sugar. There's even more than I've included on this list. But those are the ones that may be the tricky ones that you look at the list and say, oh, there's no sugar on here. Few tips to identifying sugars on labels is look for words that end in the ending ose, O-S-E, or ides, I-D-E-S. And I'm actually going to try to, can someone type that for me in the chat? If it ends in ose, O-S-E, or ides, I-D-E-S, examining the entire ingredient list may really be warranted, because you're going to see things on there that you really didn't want. Vincent says, thank you, Sihan. Vincent says, it was when I first heard about it some 14 years ago. Yes, some of us have been following this question of sugar for a long, long time. And some of you may not have been, and you may be shocked, but honestly, it's important for us to know all about this. So if sugar is already in the food that we eat, then why do we care, right? It's not like everyone's sick, right? So maybe sugar is not such a big deal. The problem with excessive sugar consumption is most health issues do not manifest immediately, as we know. And if they do, they're not usually recognized as being caused by our diets. So there are some illnesses that we immediately say, oh yes, this is caused by too high sugar consumption, or are triggered by sugar consumption. And we know what those ailments are. We've heard about them. You can type one of them in the chat if you would. But there are other things that may be caused by excessive sugar consumption. Things like behavioral problems may be attributed to other sources beyond diet. Even feelings of sadness or frustration, mental illnesses that we don't necessarily identify with sugar consumption, but that can affect the balance, the homeostasis, right? Things like allergies, arthritis, even migraines, right, are usually explained by your environment or stress levels or response to medication. Immune disorders, degenerative diseases, but people aren't grabbing their food journals and necessarily saying, oh, have I had years and years of sugar consumption that might have caused inflammation in my body and have maybe not made me as healthy as I wanted to be. More research is always being conducted on sugar, on human health, but sometimes we don't know what the connection is. So here's a little bit about sugar 101. So the best way to understand how sugar is so dangerous, we have to know first what it's made of. So before sugar leaves the digestive tract, it's composed of two simple sugars, glucose and fructose. And glucose is an important energy source and easy to obtain. If we're not consuming it in our diets, our bodies are producing it. So it's super simple. However, fructose is different. Our bodies don't produce much of it. And quite frankly, there's really no need for it. There's no physiological at least right now, known need for fructose. So that's important for us to know. And Calicia, thank you for those important ailments that may be caused by too much sugar consumption. Let's put insulin on the spotlight, right? The relationship between sugar and insulin resistance has been a crucial topic of discussion. Insulin is one of the most important hormones in our bodies, and it's responsible for directing glucose into the cells to be used for energy. However, when our cells no longer respond to insulin, our body receives the message that needs to produce more. In response, the pancreas makes more insulin, but over time, the pancreas is unable to keep up with the demand and blood sugar is no longer able to be maintained. This is known as insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is thought to be a big contributor to many diseases, including but not limited to things like obesity, right, or metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular diseases, and diabetes, type 2 diabetes, not as much type 1. Even after these diseases develop, elevated blood sugar remains an ongoing problem. So one of the problems with sugar, too much sugar circulating in the blood, is that basically we're not able to absorb those sugars. So when the blood levels of sugar are too high, then people are often put on medications that will reduce the blood sugar levels for individuals, just for safety and for health reasons. I mean, it's critical that if your blood sugar is too high, that you're seeking medical attention. And of course, there are complications from all of those diseases that I mentioned. So weigh out the consequences. It's also a no secret that obesity is a serious epidemic. 1 of 3 children and 2 out of every 3 adults are either overweight or obese in the United States. And this is a statistic really that's borne out across the world. Many people have experienced increased weight during our pandemic. Unable to go out and maybe to exercise, or even having just unhealthy foods available to us in our houses all the time. And with us being there, we're not able to say, wait, stop. When we go out and we visit with people, we see other people, we get more exercise, right? We're more able to resist some of the temptations. Sugar's role in gaining weight is much more serious than just adding some empty calories. It affects the hormones responsible for satiety and the feeling of satisfying your hunger. So it leads you to eat more, and I'm sure you know what the problem is there. Knowing this alone strengthens the case for just reducing our sugar intake. And I don't know if you know that there's a 60% increased risk of obesity in children for every daily serving of sugar-sweetened beverage in their diets. Now, sugar-sweetened beverages can be anything. It can be sodas, which we know to be culprits of additional sugar, but we have to look at things like fruit juices and lemonades, and even certain waters now contain different sugars. There's something in the US that's called, I don't even know what it's called, like some sort of an energy powder. And if you look at it, it looks like a little sachet, and you add it to water, and it says it gives you energy and it hydrates you so well and so on, but it's really just a packet of sugar. And so it's just disheartening that we need to reduce we really need to read what's on our labels, right? We also want to make sure that weight gain from sugar, what often happens is weight gain from sugar is associated with visceral fat in the abdominal area. And this breeds a higher risk profile for many other long-term debilitating illnesses, some even life-threatening. So sugar is a leading factor in the rise in obesity and many other health complications. Betsy's asking us, Lena, what are my thoughts about stevia? So, Betsy's asking, how about stevia and xylitol with no erythritol added? My thoughts about stevia specifically, xylitol I know is being added into certain sugar-free gums. Stevia comes from a plant, and if you're able to tolerate stevia and you're able to incorporate it into your diet on a regular basis because you really crave sweetness, I would say it is a good substitute. In general, I don't like substitutes for anything. I like the idea that we're slowly but surely reducing our desire for sugar, because sometimes the substitute doesn't allow us to really decrease the craving. It just is a substitute. As an interim method for reducing your sugar intake, is it a healthy choice, healthier choice? Absolutely. So stevia, I would give that a big check mark, especially if you like the taste and the results for you. Xylitol, I don't personally purchase it in health food stores. I know that there are some people that do that. I have seen it added specifically into chewing gums, and I know that doTERRA uses it in their and candies. Use it in their Slim and Sassy gum. It is a safe alternative. Let me know in the chat if anybody's purchasing xylitol to use in their diets. I know that it can be purchased in health food stores, and let me know if you're using that. But I would say yes to stevia. So spotlight on, let's talk a little bit about your liver health. Fructose, one of the main components of sugar, is metabolized by the liver, but only in significant amounts at a time. It wouldn't be a problem if everyone minimized their sugar intake significantly and increased their daily physical activity. Typically, the fructose would be turned into glycogen and be stored in the liver for safekeeping until our bodies were ready to burn this energy source, right? However, if there is already an ample amount of sugar, of glycogen in the liver, eating more sugar overloads it. The extra is forced to be turned into fat. The process is the beginning of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, among other complications. To take it even further, some studies have suggested that sugar can be just as damaging as alcohol is to the liver, even if you're at a healthy weight, which is interesting. Luckily, the liver can repair itself, but with continuous sugar consumption, it can never catch a break. So we really want to detox our livers and then reduce the stress on our liver. And I have to say, until I started doing this presentation, I didn't know the effects of sugar on the liver. So this is a brand new one for me. You also want to keep your heart healthy, right? There have been many misconceptions on what causes cardiovascular disease, the role of cholesterol, what foods help or harm heart health. Things really haven't totally cleaned up, but there is evidence to suggest that sugar is one of the main culprits. Sugar consumption is a leading contributor to heart disease, and studies have shown that consuming a large amount of fructose can cause a rise in bad cholesterol, blood glucose, insulin levels, and abdominal obesity. These findings were apparent in as little as 10 weeks. So increasing your sugar consumption for any reason, if you want some information on some studies linking sugar to disease, I will be happy to provide those to you. Let me see if I can, I have these in my notes, and if I can add them into the chat, I will. There we go. There. There's some studies for you if you'd like to if you'd like to go even a step further. But keeping your heart healthy, let's make sure we're reducing sugar as part of our diets. So your immune system. So first we talked about the liver, then we talked about heart health. Now we're going to talk about immunity. Your immune system is responsible for defending your body against illness, and that's a big deal because your immune system, if it's compromised, you're putting yourself in danger of pathogens that can make you really very sick. According to a study through Loma Linda University, 100 grams of sugar can make your white blood cells 40% less effective in killing germs. So 100 grams, not a lot of sugar. On top of already putting your body in a stressed and irritated state, sugar directly affects your main line of defense against disease. The most alarming part about this is that sugar's crippling effects stay present in your system for up to 5 hours after you eat it. So for those of you who are consuming sugar throughout the day, maybe you're starting with your warm beverage in the morning and adding a flavored or sweetened creamer to that. And then maybe at lunch, you're adding a salad dressing with sugar to your salad. All the while you're thinking, I'm eating healthy, I'm not eating too much. You're giving your body little drops of sugar all during the day. And what we want to do is really kind of cut the sugar off if we possibly can. Okay, let's also talk a little bit, and this is kind of a scary topic, sugar and cancer, right? It's hard to believe that something so prevalent in our everyday diets can actually be a contributing factor to this debilitating disease. Cancer is an uncontrolled growth, as we know, in the multiplication of cells. So how is sugar related to that? Insulin. So insulin is one of the main hormones responsible for regulating the growth of cancer cells. And it's been concluded that having constantly elevated levels of insulin can indeed contribute to the proliferation of cancer cells. Consuming sugar raises insulin. We know this, right? And so now there's evidence to suggest that these two things are related. And if you already are troubled by this disease, or somebody is that you know, it can actually contribute to the progression of the disease. So we really want to avoid this as much as possible. Let's talk a little bit about our brain power with sugar, right? Is that affected, or is our brain power affected? I would say that it is. Studies show that sugar slows down the brain's function, it hinders new learning, and decreases memory recall. So now in the short term, we know if we eat something sugary, we get a little bit of boost of energy. So we tend to think, oh, I'll have that sugary drink or that snack or that piece of candy because it's going to make me feel a little bit more energetic. But in the long run, it's going to hinder our learning and decrease our memory recall, which is not something that we want, right? There are also strong connections between high sugar intake and prevalence of depression and anxiety. And we know that this is really a very serious uh, epidemic, really, in our world, not just in individual nations. Many people are suffering from anxiety, specifically during the pandemic, and I'd like to suggest that our diets during this point are not helping us at all. So what do you think of when you think of a sugar crash, right? What do you think of? So tell me in the chat, what do you think of when you think of a sugar crash? What helps to you? And Quinny's asking, how about fresh fruits? Fresh fruits can be excellent. And I think if you're thinking about substituting fresh fruit for added sugar, that's a great thing. But we also don't want to go overboard on fresh fruits. There's evidence to suggest that excessive fruit, right? I would say more than about 2 to 3 pieces per day is probably a little bit too much. And you could say 250 grams or 250 milliliters of a sugared substance would count as 1 serving. Sihan says not durian. Okay. We know that some of our fresh fruits do contain a lot of sugar. So to answer my question though, if anybody tell me in the chat, what do you think of when you think of a sugar crash? Betsy says brain fog. Okay. Let me know. So you've eaten a lot of sugar, let's say, and then afterwards you get the crash. What does the crash mean to you? You feel tired. You may feel, what else? I'm looking for a couple of other words here. If you help me, exhausted, lethargic, sleepy. Yes, great. Ivy says lethargic. Anne says sleepy. Nazareth says exhausted and lethargic. Eileen says fatigue. Exactly. Sugar crash. Calicia says tired. So I also think of, especially Betty says food coma. I love it, Betty. That's so funny. Thank you. I also think of irritability, decreased mood, right? Now imagine, especially with kids, I remember my kids would have a sugar crash. And I'll tell you a little story about my son. My son has, as I mentioned here before, my husband has type 2 diabetes that he's been managing, that has been well managed over the last, I would say, 20 years. And my son has hyperglycemia, or managed hyperglycemia, which basically means if he eats too much sugar, he'll basically have a very strong crash. And so we've been teaching him since he was tiny, like 3 or 4, that he really had to watch his sugar intake because it would cause him to have problems. When he was in pre-K, he went to, they had something called breakfast for lunch. Breakfast for lunch on that day didn't mean that they were getting scrambled eggs. It meant that they were going to have French toast fingers. And if you've never had a French toast finger, it's basically a piece of bread that's been dipped in sugar and then deep fried, almost like a stick of donut, if you will. And he had never had these in my house. He didn't know what they were. They served them with maple syrup on the side, so a dipping syrup on the side, and he proceeded to eat a whole plate of them. I don't even know how many he had, but let's say between 10 and 20. And he was only 4 years old, so that was a lot of French toast fingers. And he had this at noon, at lunchtime. By the time I went to pick him up at the end of the day, he was literally lying on the floor face down and didn't want to get up. And the teacher said, oh, he's very tired today. And I said, what did he have for lunch? She explained to me. And actually I realized that he was basically having a sugar, I don't know, episode. I don't want to call it it was like a food coma. Exactly, Betty. But super scary. What we've taught him in the intervening years is that not only does he need to limit his sugar intake, he has to ask. And that's how we taught him when he was, does this have sugar in it? And if it does, he's got to limit it. And also we found that if he ate a little bit of sugar, if he ate something with protein with it, he was better able to metabolize the sugars. But that was a really scary event for me. And it really brought to the forefront for me how important it is for us to limit our sugar. And so between my husband and me, we've worked on him. He's 19 now, so he's not a baby anymore, but he really does watch what he eats. And he's an athlete, so he's concerned that he's able to maintain his energy levels, and what it is that what he consumes really is in a direct response to how he's able to perform. So foods rich in sugar disrupt our brain's neurotransmitters that work to stabilize our moods. So if we're continuously disrupting the function of those receptors, we no longer have the inherent control over our moods as we usually do. According to Dr. Karazan, I'm not exactly sure what university he's from. He's a functional medicine expert and author. This can be a huge contributor to chronic depression. And we know the link between certainly alcohol and depression, that alcohol depresses our mood, and sugars can act in a similar way. If you're interested in learning more about the effects of sugar on the brain, I can also provide you with a video that you can watch a little bit later. Let's see if I can get this link. Yep. And you can watch the link about sugar and the brain. Let's see. Got it. Getting better at this. Sometimes I have good days. Today's one of those days. So how are we doing so far? Are you happy about this? We haven't talked about sugar in the brain. We haven't talked about sugar at all. Got a lot of participants today. I'm so excited. This is a great event. Thank you so much for all of you being on. Okay, so now the question is, are you addicted? Are you addicted to sugar? And I'm going to have you type in the chat. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I want to get some really honest answers. I won't mention names, so you can, and if you don't want to tell me, that's okay too. Anne is already ready to tell us that she has a sweet tooth. Okay, so Anne, we want to talk to you a little about some of this stuff. So sometimes we use the word addiction lightly, right? Saying you're addicted to your favorite food. Not really, it doesn't encompass the real meaning of the word, right? According to the American Society of Addiction Medicine, addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic, biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. This is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use and other behaviors. Addiction is characterized by an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control, craving, diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behavior and interpersonal relationships, and a dysfunctional emotional response. Like other chronic diseases, addiction often involves cycles of relapse and remission. Without treatment or engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and can result in disability or premature death. So this is really, addiction is extreme. I know that's a pretty long definition, but it's important to really know what we're talking about when we say that sugar is addicting. So I've got a couple of answers here. I'm going to the chat. Let's see if I can get over to the chat now. Whoops. What? I want to go back one. We're going to talk about dopamine in a second, but I see a couple people saying, no, I have my coffee and beverages without sugar. Nazuria says, ice cream for me after trying day of work. Betsy says, being diabetic, sugar is also my medication when in low blood sugar reaction. Yeah. Chiu Su says, addicted on cheesecake as well. Vincent says, start to like cake since COVID stay home started. Yeah, I know I've been eating a lot more sugar since COVID started. Dardanella says, not addicted to sugar, but I love chocolate, which contains sugar, right, Dardanella? So we got to watch it. Olivia says, addicted to sweet cold drink. I always put extra sugar in my cold drink. So all of us have experienced that craving, that desire for sugar. And let's talk about why, right? It's the dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter responsible for controlling the reward and pleasure responses of the brain. When you eat a lot of sugar, a massive amount of dopamine is released in your brain. As you continue to consume sugar, the dopamine receptors become less powerful, making the response less effective, right? So if you eat a ton of it, did you ever eat a big lump of chocolate cake or something really super sweet, and by the end you feel like, oh my gosh, and you don't feel better, you actually feel worse. So more sugar is needed to create that same euphoric dopamine reaction. This continues into a vicious cycle, much like what happens with drug addiction. Popular study proved the addictive qualities in sugar with rats and Oreos. The pleasure regions of previously drug-addicted rats' brains were significantly more active when exposed to Oreo cookies compared to cocaine. That's a scary one. And if you want information on that study, I can provide it with you all to you also. A later study showed that the brains of people with food addiction reacted to sugar the same way as drug addicts reacted to drugs. This is really proof that sugar can take over our brain chemistry and deliberately make us crave more and more of it. So that's kind of a scary outcome. But the dopamine reaction, that feeling of I feel better, I feel more excited because I have this dopamine going on, yeah, is a really big deal. So not all sugar is created equally. While sugar is very obviously a negative contribution to our health and lives, not all sugars are the same. Some are much worse for us than others, and vice versa. So now I'm going to go through some sugars that should definitely be avoided as much as possible, as some recommended alternatives, and that's what we were talking about a little bit before. So you already mentioned to me that you like stevia as an alternative, and maybe a little bit of xylitol. I didn't hear from anybody saying what they if they'd had purchased xylitol, and you can see with these spoons that there's really a big difference. So stay clear of these. These are the ones you want to stay clear of, avoiding these products. Aspartame, right? It's a chemical sweetener, and it's known for its appearance in diet sodas. Some people can tolerate it well in the short run, while others report migraines and digestive distress. Regardless of your initial reaction, aspartame has been proven to be pretty dangerous in isolated situations. The University of Liverpool conducted a study where aspartame was mixed with a common food coloring. The result was clear toxicity to brain cells. Additionally, researchers found that when aspartame breaks down, it creates formaldehyde, a well-known carcinogen. Eek. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. Sucralose is another one that you want to kind of not look on your labels, right? So aspartame, then sucralose. Sucralose, commonly known as the brand name Splenda, is processed using chlorine. Researchers also find that the waste of consuming this sugar can't be broken down in wastewater treatment centers. So imagine what's happening inside of our bodies. If we can't break it down outside of our bodies, we can't break it down inside of our bodies. Hopefully it's excreted in its entirety, but we really just don't know. And then last but not least, high fructose corn syrup, one of these. You've heard about this again and again, my friends. If you pick up a product and it has high fructose corn syrup in it, just put it down. And if you go through your cabinets tonight and you do a double check on your sugars, and I hope this is going to be, actually, I'm going to make that our homework, that you go into your cabinets and check what are the products that have sugars in there, and maybe make a real effort to just get rid of them. So this may be a bit more challenging to avoid, but high fructose corn syrup is in almost everything. Plays a huge role in fat buildup in the liver, leptin resistance, and major weight gain if we use it consistently, or we eat products with this ingredient consistently. Study even found that high fructose corn syrup is sometimes laced with mercury. That's a scary one. I hadn't heard that before. And as we know, mercury is a heavy metal linked to many different developmental disorders and so on. But don't worry, I'm going to give you some good alternatives. So one of the ones I like and that I would recommend if you want to continue to sweeten your beverages, one of them is stevia. Stevia sweetener is an extract made from the leaves of the stevia plant. It's shown to help balance fasting blood sugar levels, cholesterol, insulin resistance, and blood pressure. It's important to pay attention to the source of the stevia. Some brands include additives, so you want to always check your label. And also the delivery system is different. It can come in a powdered form. I've also seen it in liquid drops. Use what you feel is best, but it is a good substitute. if you need a natural sweetener, because some of the ones that we were talking before are not natural, you might try the next two. Doesn't mean that you don't have to keep control of these. You do. And make sure you take them in moderation, which means tiny amounts. But you can try coconut sugar, which is a natural unrefined sugar. Also contains some healthy vitamins and minerals. So as sugar goes, it's not the worst for you. It does not contribute to the strong fluctuations in blood sugar like other refined sugars. So coconut sugar can be an option for you. And then the last one is raw honey. So raw honey has less fructose and provides other health benefits, including promoting heart health and fighting inflammation. So you want to make sure, at least with the second two, that if you're ingesting them or using them, say, to sweeten a beverage, right? Or maybe even using them in some other sort of a sauce or something that you're using those in moderation and limiting the products that already contained processed sugars in them. Too much of a good thing, we all know it can also be bad. So please keep in mind that these alternatives do break down to glucose and fructose in your body, and all sweeteners should be used infrequently at best. Okay, so I'm wrapping it all up almost. I'm almost at the end. What about organic raw sugar? So in general, organic raw sugar, while it is less processed and has fewer additives, it is still sugar and processed by the liver exactly the same way. And it doesn't have the added benefits that coconut sugar has, that has a little bit of minerals in it that could actually help you. It's just like salt, folks, right? We try to limit our salt intake, but there are some salts that are a little bit better for you because either they contain iodine, which is a naturally occurring mineral, which we need, or they contain certain minerals because they are naturally harvested. And so in small balanced amounts, they will not harm us, right? You never want to overdo it. Brown sugar, the same thing. And actually brown sugar is usually just white sugar that they've added a little bit of either colorant or molasses to. It is no better than white sugar. And molasses, in moderation, exactly, does contain some minerals, but hard to use molasses in, I have to say, I can't imagine using molasses in a beverage. It would not be too tasty. It also has a very sharp flavor to it. But again, if you needed it to perhaps sweeten. So for example, when I make a smoothie, I don't add juices or sugars to it. I'll put a whole date right in the blender and then blend up the date. So that's the way I kind of get around something like that. Dates are very high, naturally high in sugar. So I wouldn't add a handful of dates, but a single date is usually sufficient to sweeten up the smoothie if it needs a little bit of sweetening. So while it might be ideal to cut out sugar entirely, it's not really practical, is it? Because we've got to continue to live and eat. I don't know how we would do it. So, and it is because it's nearly in everything. We want to, I guess my message today is, let's find healthier alternatives, and let's practice moderation and really become aware of the dangers. Because I think if we do those three things, healthier alternatives, practicing moderation, and becoming aware, we're going to make better choices and stay healthier in the long run. So question number one is, how are you feeling? You know, I feel like now that you learned and you have this information, you'll be able to make better choices. I love essential oils that will support me in reducing my desire for sugar. And two of my favorite ones are actually grapefruit and fennel. And I actually will mix them together in a capsule or put them under my tongue. I find that after a meal, I'll be able to just have 2 of those drops, and it kind of reduces my desire for sugar. I also take drops of grapefruit essential oil under my tongue every morning. And I think it keeps my blood sugar levels balanced. I don't have those cravings for, I don't know, a muffin or a sweet pastry or even a bar or a smoothie with a lot of sugar first thing in the morning. And many of you know, full disclosure here, I used to love, I still love it, but I really avoid it now, bubble tea, which is filled with sugar. I know that you can ask for it with no sugar or severely reduced. I used to always try to get it with 25% sugar, but even with that, it really does contain a lot of sugar. And I could probably drink bubble tea every day, but I can't because it's not healthy for me. So limiting my sugar intake has been a big strategy for me. I know this has been a ton of information. Angela is saying, I feel like we cannot avoid these hidden sugars in foods unless we really eat less processed and packaged foods. That's absolutely true, which is why that list I read out in the beginning, it's important for us to note which of those foods are in our cabinets right now. If you go into your pantry or kitchen cabinets, which one of those foods do you have that right now? Betsy Lynn says wild orange on fruit or berries and no sugar necessary. You're absolutely right. So changing your eating habits and taking control of your health requires a lot of effort, but it is really incredibly rewarding. You'll experience a higher quality of life, maintain a healthier weight, have more natural energy, and you can prevent serious illnesses. So there's really a lot of value to kicking sugar to the curb and becoming the healthiest version of you. So if you need any recommendations on either or supporting your desire to phase out sugar, I'm absolutely here to help. And we're actually going to be running some tips and tricks on Instagram as a follow-up to this presentation. So over the next couple of days, if you're on Instagram, we're going to have almost like a challenge, if you will, but I'm going to be giving away my regular prizes as I always do. Thank you everyone for taking the time to experience this class, the case against sugar. I really love sharing this topic. It was interesting and I hope you enjoyed it. We had a great number of participants today. I think it had to do with the way I announced the class. I think that's what brought up our numbers so much today. It might have been that I was just on another call and people jumped over here. So either way, thank you for having been here. And I hope you've enjoyed the topic. I'm always here to support you. I had a blast doing this. I want to make sure also that you were able to, whatever links you needed were in the chat notes. And if you want support on your journey, whether it's your wellness journey specifically with doTERRA, with cutting down sugar or looking for tips to cut down your sugar, I'm here for you. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful week, everyone. And for those of you who are still on the live, I want to make sure that you got all the information that you need. If you have any questions, let me know in the chat. Betty says bubble tea winter melon flavor. Oh dear, wow. That she's had a really big bubble tea extravaganza over the weekend, and that today she was able to actually reject the bubble tea offer from colleagues. I know sometimes when we indulge a lot in one specific thing, afterwards it begins to look a little less attractive to us. Quinny says, thank you so much for the information. It was an eye-opener. Ivy says, thank you and have a great day. My goodness, thank you everyone. I'm so glad that you were all on here and we were able to share this information with each other. So I'm going to say farewell to everyone who's listening to this either on Facebook or YouTube. We're going to be back again next week with some more exciting topics. Please join us on our other social media pages and click the button below to subscribe and ring the bell so you can get notifications each and every time that we come back with a new presentation. Have a wonderful week, all of those on YouTube. And for those of you who are on the live, stay on because we're going to be giving away our prizes. So see you real soon.